Welcome back to another part of this little series on building with RescriptRelay. In this part, we are going to take the nice little view that we've created here, and we're going to turn it into a route where we can link to or look at any GitHub user's profile, essentially. And when doing that, we'll learn how to set up a new route in our router. We will also componentify or fragmentify rather all of the components we've built so far. So the ones you can see over here, see like the avatar and stuff, everything around there. We're going to turn these into reusable components with fragments in Relay. And then we're going to reuse those as we build our little extra route here for showing any profile. So just for the sake of the structure, here you can see this this little view. It's on the slash route, so we're going to continue calling this a dashboard, and that's going to be exclusively for the logged in user. And then we'll have a separate route which renders about the same view, but for any user. Yeah, okay. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to create a new page. I'm going to call that a user profile. File. Yes. And then we're going to add a query. We're going to do that on node, the node interface, and I'm going to explain why this is important. Just a second. And as we're requesting things from the node interface, we want to have things from the user. Yes, we want the boilerplate for the component, and it's going to be a preloaded query right away. Perfect. So we now have a simple query for the node interface that takes the ID, and this ID is the same ID as in here. So a briefer on why it's important to use the node interface, or why I'm using that in this case. Now in the GitHub API, there's also a top level field called user, which takes a login instead. And we could use this to look up the user, but there's an important benefit to using the node interface. And that is because when using the node interface, Relay can reuse any data that it already has in the cache while waiting for new data. Keep that in mind, remember that, because that's going to play a big part in the next video after this. But for this one, just remember that when you're asking for single entities, it's a good idea to use the node interface. Like, you don't have to, but it's a good idea because it'll help you a lot with caching. So we're going to just pull out the login here so we have something to show. Switch on data.node. If data exists and is a user, then we'll pull out the login information. Just write that out, login like that. Or if it's not, or if it's something else, something unselected, we'll just go ahead and do rect null. Another minor thing is that you could theoretically just do this, and it'll be fine as well. It'll match anything, but it's nice to, in the cases where you can, do a proper exhaustive switch, because the compiler is going to help you. So the difference here is that if I were, this doesn't make any sense, but if I were to add on user list, for instance, again, this doesn't make any sense, but just to illustrate the point, created that, the compiler would tell me that, oh, you haven't handled this. Whereas if I do this, okay, just for the sake of it, remove that and then add that back, I get no warning, right? So it doesn't tell me that I need to handle this. So this is a good thing to remember. Like, when you can be exhaustive, be exhaustive. But in this case, I'm actually going to keep this underscore because it doesn't matter here. This is a details view where we're never going to have anything else but asking for things on the user. Cool. So now we have a query, but we have nowhere to see this in the UI right now, because we haven't wired this up to any place in the app. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our routes file, routes.json. And then here on the root, right next to the dashboard, we're going to add another route. I'm going to say that it's on the URL profile and ID. We could make this explicit by just calling it user ID as well. And then we got to name this something unique, user profile. So a few more things about the router here. as you can see, the tooling gives us all sorts of hints here, and this is the full URL that this route is going to be at. So you notice that these things are added together then, because this is a child route of the root. And that's going to come in handy, because I'm not going to do that now, but there's also a way to split out your route definitions into separate JSON files and then just include them where you want them. So that's a good thing to remember. And then all routes need to have unique names within the children they're in. So as you can see, the full route name for this route is root__user profile. So within the children we're going to have to name this something uniquely. And this is also important because this is how you're going to interface with that route later on. I'm going to show you when we add links and stuff. You interface with routes by the name you give them and not by the URL they have. This is kind of important because of both understandability. It's a lot easier to understand what the user profile is rather than profile/user ID, for instance. But there's also like plenty of things we'll show where this particular thing matters. So remember that you refer to routes by the name you give them. And then finally, this small thing here is what you probably all have seen before, a path parameter. It's a string. It's required to be there for this route to match. Now, if I save this, we're going to get a route renderer created for us automatically. So we can jump in here and see that we've got a route renderer that's going to be wired up for us and created in here. And this is the what's responsible for rendering this particular route. And we're going to do the same thing as we did in the previous video. We're going to create a Codesplitting deferred component here. We're going to make sure that that is indeed loaded, preloaded, preload, perfect. And now we're going to make the query for the user profile data. And this time we actually have some things we need to pull from here. So we have the environment as usual that gets passed to us, but we also have the user ID, and this is the path parameter that we defined earlier in the route definition. So we take that one as well, and then we take user profile, the graphical generated file, we call load on it, we give it our environment, we give it a fetch policy of store or network, and we give it some variables, and it needs an ID, and that's our user ID. Perfect. Now all that's left is to render this user profile, and it takes a query ref, and we know that that's going to be in our prepared. So there we go. We've now rendered it, and we should theoretically, although I don't know. Oh, sorry, we'll change this. So if it doesn't match, we'll just say not found. What we can do here, just in order to show us what this looks like, is we can go into this, ask for the ID, and then just write out the ID here somewhere. It makes sense. String data viewer ID. Perfect. We'll copy this, go to profile /that, and we end up in our new route with our fine little name. Okay, great. That's the first part of this. We now have a route, but we haven't linked to this route yet, and we haven't added anything to the route. So before I do anything else, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a small widget down here, which shows the, let's say, top 4 followers, or the 4 first followers I can get from the API. So let's start by doing this, followers, nudes, and we'll ask for the avatar URL, and we're gonna have to need the ID for the link as well, and we'll say that we want the first 4. Perfect. We can go ahead and just to make this a little bit clearer, go into the console. Oh, we have a bunch of logs over there. Don't mind that. We'll do console dot log data viewer.followers. We'll see our nodes in here. We have 4 followers here. Perfect. So what we'll do is we'll pull out these to an array. Followers equals data.viewer.followers.nodes. That's an option of an array of options of responses. Excellent. So we'll go ahead and pull out that. Now it's an array of options, so we can use keep sum from array in order to keep just the sum stuff, the valid ones. And we now have an array of the things we want. And I like this formatting better, so I'm going to do that. Now down here, I want to render the followers. So we'll switch on the followers. If it's empty, we won't render anything. If it's not empty, we'll go ahead and render a div, flex row, followers, map that. We have a follower. Let's just render an avatar, right? And we'll turn this into a React array. And that avatar should have a source of f.avatar URL. Oh, interesting. We're going to have to fix that as well. We'll start by just rendering, or actually, let's do it like this. We'll do a key f.id, perfect. And as you can see here, we have an error, and that's because we've encountered another custom scalar, just like we had in our last video. And this one isn't mapped. So we'll go back to the avatar URL, hover that, see that this is a URI. And just for the sake of this, we're going to map this in a very simple way. We'll go into our custom scalar mapping. We'll say that URI is indeed a string. And then we'll go ahead and restart. So Relay picks up the changes. And we go back. Oh, perfect. So you can see it renders a bunch of really large avatars. And that's because we haven't set the size of them. So we'll say size 6, for instance. That's a little small. Size 12, perhaps. Perfect. And I like to kind of put them a little bit overlapping. I think that looks good. So we'll do them overlapping a little bit. That looks good. And then we'll add a border because that also looks good and make it white. Perfect. Yeah, that looks much better. And we'll self-center this. Perfect. Now we have a little bit of followers here, but still no kind of links. So I want to make sure that each of these, every avatar links to the user profile for that user. Close this one down. Okay, so in order to do that, we're going to use the built-in link component from the router. And that looks like this, RelayRouter.link. Wrap it this way, move the key up. Perfect, and it complains. Okay, so what's missing? Right, we haven't said where we want to link this to. Now, this is an important part because now we're going to create a link for the view we want to go to, and this is fully type safe. So in order to create links, remember that we named our routes. So there's a file generated for you called routes. Inside of that, you have your entire route structure that you can just autocomplete your way through to find the route that you want to link to. So we're going to user profile, and then the route of user profile. And in here, there's a bunch of different things that we can use. So for instance, we want to create a link. Perfect, make link. That takes a user ID, and that's the ID from the user. Excellent. So if we go in here, we should end up, perfect, at our new route with the ID written out. So before we componentize all of this, we've now created a route, we've rendered a few avatars, and we've linked to the new routes. Now I want to show you a couple of things here in the network that's going to be useful to understand with links. So starting off, links, they can preload both the data and the code, depending on what you want to do. So for instance, if I say, when we navigate to this new one, you can see that it makes the request right away as you hover it. That's because the default of preloading data is to do that on intent, and intent is hover when you have a mouse, for instance. You can put this to, you can set this to no preloading, won't preload anything at all. So if we do this, it'll always wait here, won't go back. It'll just make the request as we click the actual link. You could do on in view. This isn't going to make much sense here because it's going to preload everything because this is all in view, but it means that whenever you click this, you already have the data, and then that works out fine. Or you can do it on render, and that's the same thing that just does it as soon as this component is rendered, whether it's in the view or not. So that's the most aggressive part, the most aggressive preloading. Usually what you want is one of these two. In special cases, you use this for data, and you rarely use this, but it exists as a kind of escape hatch where sometimes you need it to be preloaded. And this is going to vary a lot from depending on what type of app you're working with, what type of data you have, and your backend and whatnot. But there are options here. So we'll put this back at on intent, and then you can do the same thing for preloading code. And preloading code and data, that's quite different. So by default, I think code preloads when in view. Let's try putting this on. Let's start by doing no preloading, for instance. We go, look at this, press that one, and first then it starts loading the user profile code. Excellent. Now if I can filter on this. Now if we do on intent instead, it does it there, right away here. And then on render, it'll do on render, and so on. So you can split up like when you want to preload both code and when you want to preload data. Now you can see that it loads it right away when we haven't got anything set, essentially. So that's a little bit about linking. Now, what we want to do is we want to componentize all of this because we have our nice little user profile page here, but it's really ugly. It doesn't have anything. We want to render more or less everything that we have from this view in here. So, and this is one of the strengths of Relay, obviously, that you split things into fragments. That makes it reusable, and it has a few other like consequences as well for the UI that I'm going to be showing you, especially in the next video. But starting out, I like to do this. I like to go through the UI and kind of figure out what parts are distinct from each other. So we have an avatar, a user avatar up here. We have a name that includes the name and the login. We have a list of badges over here. We have a user bio, and we have a followers widget. So we're going to take, we're going to start off with the avatar, and currently we don't have any, like we're not loading the actual avatar URL right from the for the main user, because we kind of forgot to do that in the last video. So first thing we're doing is we're adding the avatar URL, and we're hooking that up here. Source equals data.viewer.avatar URL. And there we go. My pretty face over there. Perfect. Now what we want to do is we want to take this and we want to break this out into its own component. And we have a couple of pretty interesting and productivity enhancing tooling for this in RescriptRelay. So you can mark fields, and then you can say extract selected fields to a new fragment component. Take that, and you get to name the component, and we'll say that this is going to be called the user avatar. It names the prop that you want to pass the user data into, and usually that's a pretty good standard, so or default, so I'll use user here. And then it asks me, do I want to open the new file directly? Yes, I do, to the right. Do I want to copy JSX for rendering the component to the clipboard? No, that's fine. Do I want to remove the selection? This is pretty nice. Yes, I do. and it'll automatically create a new component and insert the fragment spread and wire everything up for us here. So all that we need to do now is we need to take this, copy that in here, change that to be pulled from the user instead, and then we need to wire this component up. That's it. And in order to do this, you need to understand kind of how fragment references work in Relay. So I've spread a fragment on the viewer. The viewer is a user, as you can see. When I've spread a fragment on here, that's going to create a property on this object called fragment refs, and fragment refs contains all of the references to things you've spread, fragments you've spread on this particular object. And the component I just created, user avatar, needs that particular thing. It needs an object where the user avatar fragment has been spread on. So we're going to pass it fragment spreads. Remove this, and we're back in action. We're now rendering the avatar from the user avatar instead of doing it from the actual just pulling out the data here. And we can right away see that we can do the same thing here for user avatar. There. Do the same for our list here. Go ahead and say user avatar. All right, I remember that now. And we'll go ahead and say that the user is f.fragmentRefs. Perfect. Now, there's a thing here that I want to fix right away. If we jump into our user avatar component, I want it to take class name and just have a default that is this here. That's going to make styling the avatar a lot easier. Here we go. Now this is nice. Oops. That's because I forgot that I need to have the defaults here. Size, was it 24, right? Oh, I don't fully remember what size it was. Let's see here, user profile. Sorry. User avatar, class name. Oh, I also got to pass it the class name. There we go. Perfect. We are back. Now, I'm going to show you a small thing here that's like pretty obvious, but still neat. Now, I think that it would make sense to have a, when you hover this, to have a small title pop up showing the name of the person you're hovering. So we can, if we were to have the approach before without fragments, we'd need to do this in two places, here and here, and implement the code in both places. But since we have a fragment, we can do our data requirement in here instead. So I want the name and I want the login. We go, and then we'll go ahead and wrap this avatar with that, and we'll have a title, and we'll say that we'll switch on the user, right? And if we have a name, because that's an option, and the login, then we'll write name, login. If not, we'll just write out the login. So if we go in here and we hover me, we'll see that, yep, it's my name and the login. And if we hover any of these, it's name and the login, if they have any, if they have a name. So this is a very simple example, but this is like at the most important thing with fragments is that you make changes locally to this component, and it just works wherever you're using it in your app. So at no point did I have to go in here and change anything. At no point did I have to go in here and change anything. This is responsible for its own data essentially, and really just maps it together or puts it together here in the queries. So that's pretty neat, because that's a huge help when your app grows, that you can be sure that all of this data is the only thing that this has access to. Because if I were to go in here inside of Node and try and we don't have access to any of that data, even though we know it exists on that object. Like we know that avatar URL, name, and login is asked for in that place, but we don't have access to it. simply because it's masked for us because of the kind of locality principle or collocation principle that you want things collocated. This is a huge help and one of the big powers in Relay. Okay, but let's continue and componentify stuff. We'll go ahead and pull out these two. We'll call that user title, right? To the right, no, yes, perfect. User title. We'll copy the code that renders this. Perfect. And then data.viewer is instead now user. We go and we'll render this component now then instead. And we know that it wants a user. We know that it's on data viewer fragment refs, right? Perfect, it renders, and we're back. Excellent. Now we're continuing here and we want to do the badges rows. Take this one, construct a new user badges. Good. Open it to the right, remove the selection. Go in here, can remove this one because it doesn't make sense anymore. And we'll go ahead and render out this div from user dot created at, and then we'll render user badges, user data viewer fragment refs. Perfect, renders, we're back. Perfect, we have the bio. Take this, user bio. To the right, no, yes, remove it. Go ahead and pull out this code. Actually, doesn't have to take the braces. Yeah, it needs to be data. Oh, sorry, not data. User, perfect. We'll render it. User bio. We have the user. Data viewer fragment refs. Perfect. And then finally we have our followers. And there's a bit of a, let's see here, user followers widget is what I call that one. And there's a bit of a glitch here, so I'm gonna have to, in the tooling, so I'm gonna have to do a little bit of altercation here. It didn't really catch that I wanted the entire connection here, so I'll just go ahead and pull this one in and make this fragment on the user instead. And we'll go ahead and restructure that. Perfect. Copy the code. User instead. Perfect. And then do the same here. Switch on the followers. And we wire this one up before we finish off the components in there. Perfect. Null there because we're not rendering anything. Now we're rendering and it works. Excellent. So now we've componentified everything in here, essentially. And this is much more like what you typically see in a Relay application, where you have a bit of layout, but you're mostly working with components that you build or that already exist and are reusable. So if we go in here and we jump over here, it's still the same thing here. But what we can do now is that we can go to the user. We can open up the user profile here next to this. And we can pretty much just, because we want this to look the same, right? There's a few changes we're going to make, but we can copy paste all of this. We can make sure that we're pulling out the fragment refs there. And we can just copy paste all of this here as well. And instead of having data viewer fragment refs, we have data just fragment refs. And when we jump to a person, perfect! We're getting the same kind of view, but on its own thing that we had here. So this is the power of being able to quickly reuse stuff as well. There's one final thing I want to change before we stop this video and prepare for the next one, and that is that now that we have two identical routes here, I want to make it clear when you're viewing yourself, although I guess I do know what my name is and kind of how I look, but still I want to show it in the UI. And then when you're viewing someone that's following you. So in order to do that, we'll jump into our user badges component. And there's a prop in the API called isViewer. As you can see, whether or not this user is the viewing user. Perfect. And there's also one that is whether the user is following the viewer. Perfect. So we'll pull out both of those, and then we're going to go ahead and render these here. So we'll take if user is viewer, we'll render a badge saying is you. A nice little, maybe amber is a good color for that. See, is you, perfect. Actually, I'm gonna switch. I'm gonna, just for the sake of the visuals, we'll put this at the back, and then we'll make this flex row, justify center, and space x2. Yeah, we get a little bit of spacing in there, perfect. So this is you, and then we'll do the same thing for whether this is following you. We'll take another kind of, I don't know, green maybe. It's following you. So if I jump in here, yeah, we'll get that one. That looks terrible though with the color. I'm gonna have to change that. Emerald we don't have. Yeah, slightly better. Okay, cool. Yeah, and again, the beauty is that this component, user badges, I didn't have to do anything other than just work locally in this component, and wherever this is reused, it's automatically fixed. And the important thing to remember here is that we're actually at two distinct queries, right? So in this view, we're doing the dashboard query, which is its own thing, and then in this view, we're doing the user profile query, which is its own thing. So even though they happen to, right now, ask for the same data, Relay is responsible for wiring all of this together. So you'll never have to worry when you add a thing to something used in, like this could be used in hundreds of places in your application. When you add something here, Relay wires everything together for you, regardless of where it's rendered. So you have to think about, you think about building your application, and then Relay thinks about orchestrating everything and putting everything together. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this one. In the next one, we're going to continue working on this interaction of moving through the links, and I'm going to show you how Relay can partially render data, how you can think about how to render a little bit of the view before you have all of the data and stuff like that, and how you can work with suspense, including some browser tooling that's pretty cool for that. So until next time, thank you very much for watching, and see you soon again.